People are pouring in.
Welcome, folks. Let's see who we've got in here. See some familiar names in here. Welcome, welcome. Should be here for fruit trees. We'll get started in just a moment. During the course of the webinar today, if you would please, if you have a question, type it into the Q&A box, and that'll give our folks working in the background a chance to kind of pick out some questions to be read aloud, and then John can answer those questions for you when he gets to a good stopping point in his presentation. Awesome. Just about one more minute. We'll let some folks kind of slowly trickle in here. John mentioned just a second ago that the weather's beautiful outside, so we might lose some folks to the sunshine, but that's all right. All right, great. Well, just before we get started, if you would, just go ahead. You can type it in the, let's see here. Go ahead and type in the chat box where you're coming from today. Are you here in Manatee County? Are you from a different county? All right. Whoa, Virginia. Osceola County, Broward, Dunnellon. Great. We've got folks from all over: Orlando, Lake County, Miami-Dade, Orlando. Great. Loxahatchee. Excellent. Tallahassee. People from all over the state are joining us today. This is wonderful. Nassau County. Great. Polk. Hi, folks from Polk. You're probably familiar with Ann. Alachua, great. Awesome. Well, like I mentioned just a second ago, we're here for fruit trees today, and you're going to be in the great hands of John Dawson, who is one of our very experienced Master Gardener volunteers. And I just like to take an opportunity to give a quick introduction at the start of these presentations, and just to remind you of a few housekeeping items. Do please utilize the Q&A box to type your questions in throughout the presentation, and we'll get a chance to either answer those kind of as they come in, or John will take some of those and answer them live for you all, for those that are beneficial to the good of the group. And this is going to be recorded and will be available after the fact for you if you want to kind of review the information and take a look at it. Later, or if you know of somebody who was interested in attending and was unable to join us, they can go ahead and view the recording as well. And then this is only part one in a 3-part series. So if you would check out the next section of the series and go ahead and register for that too. And I'm sure after today, you won't be able to say no, and you'll have to come back for more information. But while as we're getting started here, I just want to thank John for offering his expertise in fruit trees and backyard fruit tree care. My name's Alyssa Vincent, and if you don't know me, I'm the residential horticulture agent here in Manatee County. And I get the pleasure of working with our Master Gardener volunteers, as well as a whole host of other folks in the community on anything related to landscape. So I don't want to take too much of your time, but thank you for joining us from all across the state. And if you haven't joined us in the past, we hope you will join us again in the future. And please, let's go ahead. And John, you can get started. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Uh, let's grow some fruit. Believe it or not, there's over 300 different species of fruit trees that do well in Central Florida. And I apologize for everybody else. I'll try to keep the state in mind. But the original presentation was for Central Florida. So that actually means there's more than that available for the entire state. But not everybody can grow tropical fruit in Jacksonville or temperate fruit down in Miami. Fortunately, here in Central Florida, we're able to grow some temperate fruit from up north, and we're able to grow some subtropical to tropical fruit down south. There's a limited number of fruit that will actually grow throughout the entire state. So before we actually start getting into buying trees and then just bringing them home and then saying, oh, where should I put it? You really should consider some things before you even contemplate going out to buy a tree. Usually what happens, people from up north, they come down here and they want to put in their apples, their peaches, but they really want to buy an orange tree or grapefruit, and they run out to one of the local nurseries, or they go out to a flea market, buy a tree, bring it home, stick it in the ground, and usually it doesn't do well, and they go to their local extension office and wonder what happened. So some things you ought to consider before you even go out the door. HOA, Homeowners Association restrictions. In 2019, they passed a law saying you can actually grow edible vegetables and fruits on your property throughout the entire state. Unfortunately, it did not include HOAs, which are privately owned, not publicly owned. So all HOAs have different restrictions involving what you can plant, where you can plant. I happen to be the president of our local HOA, and we're not as restrictive as many folks. Most fruit trees are very, very nice ornamental type trees that you can put in your landscape, providing both shade, good presentation, and fruit. There are some homeowners associations say you can't plant any kind of fruit whatsoever because they do not want to bring wildlife into the area, which is somewhat sad. So before you start, know what your HOA restrictions are. And if you happen to be in one in which they say, no, you can't grow fruit trees, get with your neighbors and see if you can't change the bylaws. Your lot topography. You should have received some sort of plat map that shows that hopefully your house is situated on a higher spot, and you know the elevations of your yard. You know where the low spots are. Are there easements on either side? You can't plant in those. Are there swales on either side? You can't plant on those either. So basically you should know just about how your land is. Is it flat, or is it sloping toward a pond or some kind of natural creek or something? So keep that in mind. Sunny areas. For the most part, fruit trees do well in full sun. Almost all require full sun for good fruiting. There are some exceptions that do okay in partial shade. However, full shade is never a good thing for a fruit tree. So those shady spots will change throughout the year as the sun changes its orientation up in the skies. So if you have a large oak and you look at it in the summer, it may have a short shadow, but in the wintertime, it has a longer one. So you have to keep in mind where those shady areas are, unless you're planting something that tolerates some shade. Mostly you want 6 to 8 hours a day of sunlight. Obstructions, both overhead and underground, okay? You don't want to plant a tree with power lines overhead. You don't want to plant a tree near roadways where the tree will grow to a point where the branches intrude into a roadway, in which case the county or city may come through and just cut those down anyway. You certainly don't want to plant anything near your home. As a rule of thumb, you basically want to keep fruit trees away from 25 feet away from any kind of structure like your garage or your walls for your home. Also, at least 6 feet away from any kind of structure such as a driveway or a walkway. Underground obstructions, okay? You've got all sorts of utilities that are basically underground nowadays. Your electric, your water, your cable TV, telephone, even your irrigation system. All those things are hidden underground. For the utilities, you can call 811 and they will come out and map where the utilities are. Mostly your water and sewer, electric, if it's underground, gas, any of those things. But those are all to protect the companies, okay? They don't have to send people out to fix a sewer line once you've basically plowed into it with your shovel. If you want, you can go into our Master Gardener Garden Bench. It's our monthly newsletter. We now have the ability, it's in a web area in the cloud, in which you can pull up the April 2016 issue. On page 6, I have an article which I explain how you can map all of your underground utilities, including things like tree roots, natural things as well, just by using a metal coat hanger. And that's another story for another time. Soil structure, okay? Do you have a sandy soil? Is it impacted with clay? A lot of our communities are built on foundations of clay that were brought in or was pushed in once they built the retention pond. So some areas have very hard compacted clay in which the water doesn't penetrate too well. Others are extremely sandy in which the water seeps through at a fast rate. Your soil pH. It's a factor from 0 to 14, in which 0 to 7 is basically the more acidic type plants, and 7 above are the more alkaline type plants. And in the area in between, possibly between 6.5 to 7.2 is where most of the pH in our area happens to be. However, there are some hidden things underground. A lot of contractors will bury a lot of construction debris underneath your property. And sometimes you'll be digging around, you'll find old cinder blocks, or you'll find broken pieces of metal and those types of things. That will actually change pH as well. So you really need to know what your soil structure and pH is before you go out and buy a tree, because you want to match the tree's natural habitat with your own as close as possible. Fruit trees need water, okay? What kind of water do you have available? Is it city municipal water? Is it reclaimed water? Do you have well water that you provide as well? These are all things you need to know. You need to know whether or not your water has a lot of salt content. A lot of fruit trees do not tolerate salt very well. So these are things we can do. At the extension office nearby you, there's usually the ability to check your soil and your water for pH and salt content. It's usually a nominal fee between $3 and $5 to do that. What existing plants do you have in lawn? Okay, so if you plant a fruit tree and it grows up and provides shade, maybe it's now causing problems with your existing plants, a prized rose bush or what have you. Your lawn, is it the type that manages to get into just about everything, like your St. Augustine, crowds out around your tree and basically provides a position where it's not getting enough nutrition because it's being hogged up by the lawn? Your abilities and limitations, okay? We're talking about maintenance next week, but you need to be able to determine whether or not you have the ability to plant a tree, dig a hole, lug around fertilizer bags, lug around water if it's not nearby, and your limitations. You have to realize that these trees will probably be in your landscape for the next 30 years or so. So if you're like me, most trees will outlive you. And as you get older, your limitations become a little bit more difficult. Get to the point where you may have to actually hire someone to do those types of tasks. All these things just keep in mind before you do anything whatsoever. Again, this is how most references look at Florida. So if you look up a certain type of plant, it says it does well in north and central part of the state. And this is what they mean. These are the various counties that they consider north, central, and south. Usually has a lot to do with cold tolerance capabilities. So that doesn't mean that if you're in Pinellas and you grow your subtropical tree close to the coast of Gulf of Mexico, that somewhere along in Lake County, you can grow that same tree as well. So there are things you need to consider. It's not a broad brush. If it says central, you can grow it just anywhere in central. So just keep that in mind as well. You need to garden in the zones. So you need to know what your cold hardiness zone is and your heat stress zone. The ones I show you here are for Manatee County. Each county will be slightly different. So you can check with your extension office if you do not know yourself. And there are references that show you these things as well. Here in Manatee, we're basically zone 9B through 10A. When I first moved here 13 years ago, we were in cold hardiness 9A through 10A, where 10 is being the warmer and 9 is being the colder. If you're from up north, you may have lived in the zone 4, okay? Things have actually gotten warmer over the years. There's also the heat stress zones. Here in Manatee County, west of I-75, we're basically in heat stress zone 10, and east we're in 11. So what does that all mean? Here's the state as it's mapped out as plant hardiness zones by the United States Department of Agriculture. It's a little bit more defined, and you will notice that over the years, those numbers have changed, okay? So if you're looking at an old textbook, maybe 10 or 15 years old, it may say the tree is good for zone 9A or 9B. And over those 10 years, things have warmed up. So you need to look at a more modern reference as to cold hardiness. So you can see here in 2021, things here in Manatee County has changed somewhat drastically. It has warmed up. You look back in 1974 through 86, you can see it was actually a little cooler back then. All right, so get a more current reference if you want to know exactly where you are. And again, you can contact your extension office and they should be able to tell you. Now, this is a chart that shows freeze days. And this one is basically representing 2005 through 2010. And the Bradenton 5 east-southeast happens to be the Bradenton-Sarasota Airport. That's where they have a weather station there. What it basically says is that, and most people already realize this, our coldest months are January and February. And it gives you a 90% to 10% probability levels. So if you check and you see that the fruit tree you're interested in basically has cold damage when the temperatures get below 38, 40 degrees, those probably will not do well down here. The last frost in our area down here was in 2010. So I have not been able to find a more accurate, up-to-date chart than this. So Just be aware. Heat stress zones, okay? This is Manatee County, and you can see mostly toward inland, we have more hotter days. So plants basically start to become physiologically stressed when the outside air temperature is above 86 degrees for 6 hours or more. Most of these temperature variations are for a period of 6 hours. So cold hardiness, heat stress, is all for 6-hour periods, okay? So those trees you used to have up north, or your bushes like your lilacs and things like that, can't take the heat down here in Florida. They become physically stressed. And when a plant becomes physically stressed, it's basically going to either not survive, or it'll be under a stress in which it's attacked by various insects and diseases and things like that. So those things you need to find out. It's a little bit more difficult finding information on heat stress, but usually if you're talking about zones, they will indicate that the trees itself can tolerate some heat and some cold. So each plant has a different tolerance. Now, the other problem we have down here when we're talking about heat stress is the fact that sometimes our winters are not cool enough or cold enough. So we have what we call low chill hours. If you remember up north, your fruit trees would do well all summer long, and then in the fall, the leaves would drop, and they would sit all winter long under a blanket of snow and ice and everything else, and you'd sit there waiting for spring, and the leaves would come back, and then during the summer, the fruit would show up. Well, those trees had a period of dormancy or hibernation. So when the outside temperature is between 33 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit, that's considered a chill hour. So certain fruit trees require so many chill hours. That means they have to sleep for a while, okay? And get enough energy to come back and produce more fruits. Now, if you bring a tree down here that requires a large number, like 800 hours, and you plant it in an area where you only get about 200 hours, it will never do well if it survives at all. I have this average number of 240. This is about a number that's 10 years old. Since it has warmed up quite a bit in the last 10 years, I would imagine the number is closer to 210. So that green spot you see that says 110 to 200 is probably moved in toward Manatee County. And for those folks up north, you can plant a lot of the temperate fruits you may be familiar with up in the middle latitudes, say from lower New York down through Virginia, and be able to plant a lot of those types of fruit trees, and they'll do well. So here's some of the fruit trees that you may be familiar with from up north yourself. And a lot of people wanted to continue growing these things because that's what they were used to. So the 300 and some odd fruit that you can grow down here, most of those are subtropical to tropical type fruits, things that most people are not even familiar or aware of or have never even heard of. So we're looking at these things, and we can see that blackberries should do well down here. I've actually found them in the woods themselves. I haven't found one that tasted as good as the one we used to have up in Maryland. So that has a lot to do with it as well. The actual soil and temperatures and things like that tend to have an influence on the types of sugars and things they can develop. Figs, persimmons, pomegranates, and grapes do well. Now, eating grapes do not do so well down here, and the wine grapes do not do so well down here. Why? Because it's too hot. So they have this area in which they can tend the cold, but they can't tend the heat. Our native muscadine grape has a very thick skin, and it will tolerate the heat down here. So the various types of wine industries that tried to start up here in Florida basically had to hybridize their wine grapes with the muscadines in order for them to actually produce and do well down here. Strawberries, you'll see 200 to 300. Up north, they're grown as perennials, but they don't do well with the heat down here as well. So even though we do grow a tremendous amount of strawberries here in Florida, most of the commercial crops are annuals. So they will bring in strawberry seedlings from up north, plant them down here, and they will do well. Now, when I give these classes in front of a large audience, I basically ask the question, why was there a large influence of people moving to the state of Florida after World War II in the early 50s? And the answer is because that's when central air conditioning became more available. So folks would come down here and they would try to grow their roses and their northern fruit trees and fruit berries and things like that. And they basically wouldn't do well down here. So Florida determined they were going to put together a low chill program. So the University of Florida put together the second low chill program in the world. The first was in Israel, then here in Florida, and then they did one in California. There's now one in Australia and South Africa, basically trying to breed fruit to withstand the shorter cold periods down here. So over the years, they've been able to develop through crossbreeding and things like that, fruit that don't require as much chilling. Raspberries. People ask me, can you grow raspberries in Central Florida? If you look down on the chart, you'll see there is no C for Central Florida. You can grow Dormer Red up north, and you can grow the Mysore down south. In fact, I have seen Mysore growing in Fairchild Gardens down in Miami. The only problem is that Mysore is a black raspberry, so it's not really a red raspberry at all. And Dormer Red, although red, has no flavor. So, why would you want to plant a red raspberry that basically doesn't have any flavor to it? You can grow raspberries here as annuals. You have to basically get rootstock from up north. So there's always a way around everything. If you have a greenhouse, you can grow a lot of tropical things, even up north in the northern part of the state, but not everybody has a greenhouse. In fact, I know some folks down here who have a large greenhouse. They grow several types of tropical fruit trees that require zone 11 or greater, things you would finally see around the equator, inside their greenhouse. So that's always a way. One of the low chill experiments that have done well over the years is the University of Florida's low chill peach program. At the very beginning, back in 1982, they came out with Florida Prince, which did well. The only problem was it was small, didn't have a lot of flavor. You have to remember that flavor comes with sugar development, and it takes a while for sugar to develop in a fruit. And you'll see things on here that says patented and not patented. Fruits, like everything else, and vegetables and roses, a lot of different types of plants, you can obtain patents from the United States Patent Office to protect your investment in all these breeding efforts. Patents last for about 20 years. So you see a patent that was brought out in 1982 is already lapsed. If you have a patented plant, you're legally not allowed to breed it yourself, either by cuttings or by seed, unless you get the permission from the person who holds the patent. If you have a plant that's no longer patented, you are capable of propagating those yourself. Now, non-melting and melting, people say, what is that? Well, remember when you were a kid and you bit into a peach and the juice would be all over your place? You can see a little girl down there with the napkin. Those are melting peaches, full of juice, okay? Those don't travel well and they don't sit well on the shelf. So you're not going to find a lot of, in fact, you probably won't find any melting peaches in the stores these days. So what they have are non-melting peaches. Mostly non-melting peaches aren't as sweet, aren't as juicy, okay? But they sit well on the grocery shelf. So if you really want a good peach, you're just gonna have to go out and buy a peach tree that you like and try growing it here. They will never contend with the peaches grown in South Carolina or in Georgia. So just be aware of that. Okay, before we start, want to make sure you get it right. That means you have to do a little bit of homework. Okay, you want to find the right plant in the right place in your landscape. You want to plant it the right way at the right time. And what I add to that list is try before you buy. Okay, let's take mangoes, for example. You go to a big box store and you see mangoes. They have a couple of them there and it just says mangoes. It doesn't say what kind, it doesn't give you any kind of botanical information as to genus and species. And just be aware that in the mangoes, there are over 2,000 species. I mean, varieties, excuse me. There's several hundred species, but there's over 2,000 varieties that you can choose from. And which one is it you like? It's kind of like you never know until the actual fruit comes out. So you don't want to spend 3, 5, 8, 12 or more years waiting for fruit just to find out that the fruit you're growing on your tree is one you don't particularly care for. Okay, so you don't have a big lot, or your lot's full of shade and you don't have anywhere but a few spots around your house that are clear that you can grow things. So you can actually grow a lot of fruit in containers, okay? Even people who live in condominiums that only have a small balcony, as long as it gets anywhere from 6 to 8 hours of sunlight at that balcony, you're good to go. So there's a large number of different types of fruit trees that you can actually grow in a container with no problems whatsoever. Why grow in containers? Again, if you only have a small space, they take up less space. You can move them. So if there is a freeze warning in your area, or there's a major storm like a hurricane or a tropical storm coming up, you can actually move them into your garage or inside your home or in a safe spot. I have a hand dolly in which I move my trees around. And whenever there's a freeze warning, which I haven't had for the last 10 years, but I've had several hurricanes from through. So my garage winds up being filled full of fruit trees and orchids. They're easier to water, easier to fertilize, a whole lot easier to weed, and it forces the trees to maintain a manageable size. If we go back looking over at this thing, this carambola tree, normally it tolerates shade. So this is one of those few trees that will tolerate shade. Now the tree normally planted will get about 10 or 12 feet tall, and it can put up as many as 300 pounds of fruit every year, which means that's a lot of fruit, and most people can't eat that much. Now, the fruit on a lot of container trees will probably be a bit smaller and less of them, but you'll still be able to grow those fruit. In fact, a lot of fruit trees can be grown as bonsai, in which case it's more of an ornamental thing. It's not like you're going to get a lot of fruit to eat on a bonsai tree. So here are some of the temperate fruits. Folks up north, blackberries, blueberries, figs, and strawberries. And some of the strawberries grown up north can be grown as perennials, okay? Down here, we basically wind up growing them as annuals. Pineapples, the easiest thing in the world to grow in a container. I do them all the time. Basically, we have several articles, and I'll show you how to get to those at the end of the program, in which you basically save the top off the pineapple you were eating and enjoyed, go through the process of planting it, and about anywhere from 18 months on, you'll get a brand new pineapple, and you can continue that over and over again. Miracle fruit. I grow miracle fruit and basically provide fruit to a lot of friends that I know that are going through chemotherapy and things like that. It basically takes the metallic taste away from the chemotherapy. Easy to grow in containers once you learn the trick. And we'll get through that in a minute in water quality, okay? So these are types of fruit. It's not a complete list, but it's a small list. And there may be some things on here like patombas, carambola, cocoa plums, K apples, and things like imbe you've never heard of. So it's one of those things like maybe give it a try. But if you can, there's a lot of tasting type fairs and organizations that you can actually find places where you can taste some of these fruit. The Rare Fruit Council has clubs throughout the state. Also, there's various types of like mango festivals in which you can taste other things other than just mangoes. Here's my pineapple patch from a couple of years ago. I usually have different stages. You'll see a real small one off to the right. Once they get to a certain size like this here, I have to anchor it down. And what I use is the nails that you hammer in your gutters with, or you can get spikes, and I just drive them through the plastic on the bottom so they don't topple over. Okay, let's talk about soils for a few seconds, okay? You really need to know how well your soil drains. Most fruit trees do not like sitting in standing water. More trees and plants die from drowning than from drought, okay? So one of the things you can do is check out how well your soil drains. So if you find a spot in the yard where you believe this is where I'm going to plant my fruit tree, dig a hole about 12 feet in diameter and about, 12 inches in diameter and about a foot deep. Save the soil, fill it with water. Wait until the next day after the water is drained. If it hasn't drained, you've got problems, okay? Fill it again and see how long it takes before the water drains. If it drains in less than 10 minutes, extremely sandy, which means you're going to have to find ways of retaining soil moisture before you ever even consider putting in a fruit tree. But it should drain within an hour. 20 minutes would be preferable. If it takes more than an hour, now you have other problems, in which case the soil is retaining water and you need to find ways of planting so that the roots are not sitting in water all the time. So how can you do that? Well, if you go to a lot of the fruit orchards and groves, you'll notice that the trees are planted in rows and on mounds, okay? Fruit trees, like a lot of other trees in the state of Florida, do not put down long tap roots. In fact, the roots spread out. That's because most of the soil is, in fact, pretty much loose. And the structural roots need to find a way to anchor the tree. And the various types of roots that go out called feeder roots that bring in the nutrients need to find a way to capture the nutrients before they go through the actual soil. So the sandier the soil, the more the roots will spread out so that it has the capability of being able to capture various nutrients that filter through. So if you have a low spot or you have a spot that takes within an hour or more to drain, you may consider growing on mounds, okay? I have a neighbor who planted a tangerine tree, and within about 2 years, the whole tree sunk in the ground. And it would sit in water for hours at a time. And the reason that happened is that a lot of contractors, when they prepare your lot, instead of hauling tree trunks and logs and things off to the landfill, they save money by just burying it in your property. When those logs and tree trunks finally rot, the soil drops, okay? So the poor guy's tree died. And not listening to what I had to tell him, he planted another tree in that same spot 2 years later, it was dead. So just be aware of those things. There's always an exception to every rule. I have a friend who was the president of the Manatee Rare Fruit Council. He grew a lot of fruit on his property. He had over 5 acres, but he had a spot in the back that was constantly wet, kind of marshy. Couldn't grow anything there. So he was growing what they call sugar apples, or Anonas, which is the genus name. And in that genus, there's only one that will tolerate wet feet, and it's called the pond apple, which is the Annona glabra. And what you're seeing are pond apple trees growing in the Fakahatchee swamp. What makes them famous, other than being able to withstand a lot of water, is the fact that they play host to the elusive ghost orchid. So you orchid fans will find that if you want to find a ghost orchid in the Fakahatchee, look for a pond apple tree. So his solution was growing pond apples from seedlings and then grafting his other Anonas on top of that, and then planting that into the wet spot. So that's a pretty sneaky way of getting things done, but it doesn't always work for every species of tree. Water, okay. Rainfall is always an important source of irrigation, because once the fruit tree is basically settled and it's basically in the ground and doing well for over 30 days, most of our fruit trees can be watered just from what rain we receive during our rainy season. And during the wintertime, where they don't do a lot of active growing to begin with, they only need water if there's a very long extended period of drought. Okay, but even then, for the first 30 days, you have to be able to find ways of getting water to your tree. So if you're not close to a spigot and you don't have a long hose, you're going to have to, lug some water over there any which way you can. Good quality, well reclaimed or city water, you can use that as your irrigation source. Just beware, there are certain plants that will not tolerate the chlorine and fluorine that may be present in your city water. It may not tolerate the salt that you may find in your reclaimed water. Okay. Rainwater is the best solution. If you can save it in a rain barrel, that's really a good source of water for your fruit trees. However, I tell people, if you look off to the side of the road, you'll see all sorts of trees growing there that nobody's taking care of. So it depends basically on Mother Nature and Florida's 2 seasons to be able to provide water for your trees. In fact, I rarely ever water my trees during the rainy season whatsoever. They do fine. And I have yet to have to water during the dry season, because we do get a rain here and there. And you can usually tell when a tree is stressed, the leaves start to curl, basically needs water at that time. Most people, however, will drown their tree more than they will suffer from any kind of loss in a drought season. Okay. And even if you do have a tree in which you need to water for the first 30 days, you can do so even though there may be water restrictions in your area, okay? But after those 30 days, you basically need to adhere to the various water restriction and rules that apply to your area and your home. Okay, so you took the time, you did your homework, you found a good spot in your yard, and everything seems to be approved with your HOA. It's a nice sunny spot. You've learned that there's no underground obstructions. There's nothing on the above it as well. You want to make sure that if your tree is supposed to be 20 feet wide at its full height, that you're at least that far away from your structures, including fences. So if you grow a fruit tree and the branches hang over your fence and into your neighbor's yard, they will either enjoy the fruit or they'll get after you because they don't want all that fruit messing up their yard. And they do have the right to be able to take off any part of that tree that hangs over their side of the fence. So There are different restrictions in different areas, so you basically have to find out what rules apply to your municipality. So uh, you've got a fruit tree in mind that matches your soil pH. Turns out it will tolerate some salt that may be in your reclaimed water. Uh, you're still pretty good shape and you take care of the tree. You've actually tasted the fruit and you like it. So let's go get a tree. You've done your homework. You've called around. What you do not want to do is buy a tree sight unseen, which basically means unless you actually know for a fact that the source that the tree is coming from, you want to stay off the internet or mail catalogs and things like that. You want to find a reputable nursery, preferably in your own hometown. Ask where they get their source of stock. So if you're in our area, you go to a nursery and you find out that all their fruit trees are being shipped up here from Dade County, where Miami happens to be, they may or may not do well in your area. Remember, the folks who sell trees are in the business of making money, and they don't always give you the tree that you really need. So ask around, get all the information you can. If it's a really good, reputable nursery, they will tell you where their stock comes from. If you can, find a nursery that basically grows their own trees on site. That way you'll know that in your local area, those trees should do very well. Avoid the urge to buy a tree already set with fruit. Now, you go to the big box stores, a lot of times you'll go in there and you'll see these little oranges, little types of fruit hanging on the tree. People want to know, oh, look, I'll have fruit in no time. Those trees are being forced to produce fruit, okay? There's various techniques that the growers use, basically force feeding them, providing them with all the nutrients they need. You take that tree home, put it in your landscape, and then you get a call from those folks at the extension office, or you call them up and say, what's wrong? It's not growing fruit. Well, you're no longer providing the same type of force feeding and nutrients that the growers were providing just to force the fruit to come out. So now your tree's stressed. It usually will drop the fruit and it won't produce for maybe another 2 or 3 years. So avoid that, because that's basically tempting you to buy something that you shouldn't. In fact, if you plant a tree, one of the things I tell folks is when it first starts to fruit, pick the fruit off the tree. Don't allow it to get to full size. What you want to do is force the tree to provide a good root structure. Healthy roots make for a healthy tree. So you want the roots to grow, not a lot of fruit to grow. Check for pests, diseases, and malnourishment, okay? So if it looks sick, or you shake it and there's a lot of white flies flying off the tree, go somewhere else, okay? Almost all fruit trees are now grafted, okay? That's because breeders have produced various types of varieties that people are asking for, and the only way you can actually provide those varieties is through grafting, or what we call cloning, okay? It basically takes a rootstock, which is disease resistant, or it's more resistant to flooding. And you take a scion, which is the top portion, that is taken from the tree that you actually want to buy as fruit, and it's grafted onto the bottom end using various techniques. You look at the lower left, this is a wax graft, something they haven't used for 10 or 15 years, and it hasn't calloused over. So there's no guarantee that this basically little fruit tree will ever callus over and grow. And it's probably not going to make it. To the other right, you'll see things like sunburn or malnourishment. If it's on the sale rack, leave it alone. I always tell people, just like buying any kind of tool, buy the best you can afford, okay? If you get a larger tree, you'll be spending more money. It just means you'll get fruit a little bit earlier. If you can wait, go down and get the smaller size, like in the 3-gallon area. Pull it out of the pot and check the roots. Ask permission first. A good nursery will allow you to do that and will actually do that for you. Of course, if it's in a very large 25-gallon pot, that's not possible. You want to make sure that the various structural roots are not circling the pot. If it's kept in a pot too long in a small size and it's not potted up, because potted up means you're going to raise the price of the tree, it's going to wind up hitting that plastic barrier and it's got nowhere to go, so it will start to circle the pot. This causes many problems. If you get these types of trees and you plant them, maybe in 2 or 3 years, that tree will actually die, okay? So you don't want that. Make sure the tag provides the botanical name and variety. We'll get that in a second. And ask for any type of return and warranty policy. Most reputable nurseries will give you at least a year or so. So again, try avoid using the temptation to go out and buy a tree, and you go there to maybe one of the big box stores and you see a tree and it says mango, but it doesn't tell you what variety it is, so you really don't have any clue. As you can see, as they get a little bit larger or they get a little bit more rare or something that you don't see very often, the price starts to go up. You can grow your own from seed, or you can try your hand at grafting. Hopefully when we get past this pandemic, we'll have more in-class presentations. I will try to provide you with a class on grafting so you can actually graft your own or do air layering, another method of cloning trees. This is 2 trees that it's called Diospyros nigra, or commonly known as black sapote. It's also known as the chocolate pudding fruit, okay? A lot of times you'll go to one of these big plant sales and you see all these names, especially on varieties. It sounds really cool, like a peanut butter tree or an ice cream tree or something that's called sweet tart or peach cobbler or something like that. These are all things that basic breeders put together to entice you to buy it because you think that's what it's going to actually taste like. These trees, I started with 6 seeds. This was last Christmas. Somebody brought in some black sapote brownies and cake. Also brought in some seeds that were left over. Of the 6, 2 survived, and here they are. This was several months ago. These are about 8 inches. They are now currently 3 feet tall. Both will be for sale at our big plant fair this coming up March 20th. Here's something you need to know when you buy trees. Some fruit trees are what they call monoecious, which means they have both male and female flowers on the same tree, okay, which means they self-pollinate. Monoecious means within the same house. Dioecious means of 2 different houses, which means that you have both male trees and you have female trees. And in order to get fruit, you have to have a female tree, which is pollinated by a male tree. Then it gets a little bit more complicated because some species have both male, female, and what they call monoecious species, or if you want to get into it, homosexual or polygamous or whatever you want to call it, where they're both male and female. So unfortunately, until this tree gets to be about 5 or 6 years old, that's when the flowers come out and you can determine if it's a male tree or if it's a female tree or if it's one that's both male and female flowers. Okay, so you really don't know. Now, this particular seeds came from a tree which is monoecious, which means it has both male and female flowers. So the odds are that these are as well. However, there are no guarantees, and I'll have to tell people that when they buy the tree. You could get lucky. All right, what I tell folks is go to Fruitscapes. All you have to do is put in your search engine Fruitscapes :IFAS, Institute of I never get this, Food and Agricultural Sciences, okay. In it, you will find all sorts of information on various types of fruit trees that do well in Florida, okay? So the entire state is represented there. A lot of the publications provide all sorts of information. It's basically all you ever needed to know to grow that tree. So you can look up the black sapote and it will have information there, but it also has various types of general information on how to plant a tropical fruit tree or planting a low chill peach tree. So there's little videos that are there. There's all sorts of publications that are there. There's also a publication that's been out for several years on how to plant a fruit tree, okay? Here's something you just basically need to know, because there's a lot of other information on how wide and how deep you need to dig a hole and what you should fill the hole with. For the most part, you want to dig a hole as deep and as wide in diameter as the pot it came in. Okay, save the soil that comes out of the hole. If your roots, if you look at the bottom center, okay, if your roots look like that, that's fine. But if they're starting to get crowded, like on the right side, you'll want to separate those roots. Now, these other pictures, if you see on the lower left, these are trees that were planted, but when they were pulled out of the pot, you can see the large structural roots coiling around in a circle. They will continue to do that, okay? If you can catch it early enough, you can actually prune some of that away. However, I recommend not starting with those types of troubles to begin with. That's why you want to pull the tree out of the pot. Okay, so again, do not fertilize, put any fertilizer in the hole. Do not fill the hole full of water and then pluck the tree inside of that. What you want to do is make sure that the tree is placed in the hole. You want to make it so that the tree, when pulled out of the pot, you'll see where the actual soil line is. You want that soil line to be above the hole. So you may want to refill some of the hole with some of the dirt you pulled out of it. And I say dirt, but mostly soil. And make sure that it's sitting maybe an inch or two above the soil line, because it will actually sink as it settles, all right? So then what you do not want to do is put it too deep. If you pull or you plant the tree below the soil line, okay, you're basically you're not providing the upper area of the roots the air it needs, and you will basically drown the tree, and it will look sad and probably die on you to begin with. So most time people have problems with their trees after they've been planted for maybe a year or less. It's because they planted them too deep. Always plant a little high to be on the safe side. All right, for the first 30 days, you need to make sure that those roots stay moist. The best time to actually plant the tree is during our rainy season. And the best time to plant a tree is early in the day when it's still cool, if possible, on a day that's cloudy and no wind, okay? You don't want the roots to dry out. Once they dry out, they die, all right? You don't want to put fertilizer in the hole because fertilizer will burn those newly exposed roots, okay? You want to mulch the tree, but you want to keep the mulch at least 8 to 12 inches from the trunk, okay? You don't want to promote any kind of root rot near the trunk base of the tree. And you want to also make sure that you don't provide a little home for critters that tend to like sitting in the mulch. So avoid trouble. Dig as wide and deep as the roots. If they are somewhat contained in the container, you'll want to spread them out. You want to make sure that the graft junction, if it's a grafted tree, you can see it looks like a little knuckle. That has to be at least 2 inches above the soil line. Okay, if you plant it below, the tree will die, or if it doesn't die, it's going to provide root structure for the tree on the top, and that's not what you want. All right, do you have to stake a tree? The answer is no. Most trees you do not, or do you don't really want to. You want to make sure that the tree actually has a chance to move about when the wind blows, okay? That movement actually forces the lignin in the trees to provide a harder substance for the bark, and it makes the tree a little bit more sturdy. So in the bottom left, you'll see a tree that's basically unable to move whatsoever, okay? It probably will not do well depending on the tree itself. On a windy day, it may actually blow over. That's because the roots have never had to actually stress and hold the tree. The one in the middle is probably best. You want to make sure that if you actually need to, make sure it has a little wiggle room so the tree can bounce around. I know people who go out and beat their trees with a roll of newspaper just to get it to grow a little stronger. About the only time I've ever needed to stake a tree is if the small little tree that I planted was knocked over in a storm, in which case you want to root it back up as fast as you can, and then you stake it until the roots have reestablished themselves. You don't want to have that tree staked for more than 2 years. Less than 1 is preferred. Of course, things like your tall date palms and things like that probably require at least 2 years before it establishes itself. And mostly because if it does fall down, it's going to cause a little bit more damage. So, for those of you who do not get our newsletter, it's not required that you actually live in Manatee County. We'll provide you a copy each month via your email. In Manatee County, you can find copies within our libraries as well, and at the Extension office. Every month we have some really great articles on things that pertain to that particular month and some things that people have had problems with. So we've been doing this for over 20 years that I'm aware of. We normally keep issues back at least 5 years. Right now we have an index that we put together this year in which you can go back and view past articles. You may not remember what month they appeared in, but now we have the actual title of the article, what month and what page and what year the article appeared, and you can actually find that on the website. It's a little bit more difficult to find if you're not actually on our newsletter mailing list. So you would search Manatee County Extension Master Gardeners. Then click on Master Gardener Volunteer Program, University of Florida IFAS Extension. On the lower left corner, scroll down, you'll see Resources, Master Gardener Newsletter. And that'll take you to the newsletters yourself. So you'll see things like alternatives to citrus, backyard fruit, small space gardening, articles on certain types of fruit trees themselves. The article on how to find your underground utilities is in there as well. There's a whole list of things you may be interested in. You can go to there and find some really good reference points. Here in Manatee County, we have the Palma Sola Botanical Park. There's over 68 species of fruit trees growing there, as long as, well, it's a beautiful park to begin with all sorts of plants and things, and a great picnic area. People actually have their weddings there. So if you want to see what the tree will look like once it's in your landscape and it's a mature tree, you can go to the park and be able to look at some of these things. Almost all of the fruit trees that can be grown and are popular in our area appear at the Palma Sola Botanical Park. It is in a Zone 10A area, so there are a few trees that will do well in Zone 10A, but if you're in the northeastern part of our county or further up north in the state, you probably will not be able to grow those trees there. So again, you need to do your homework. Here at the Extension Office, we're available for any kind of walk-ins or you want to call in on the phone or reach us by the internet. We'll be more than happy to answer any kind of questions you may have. We're here to provide the homeowner with educational material on all sorts of landscape things, as well as insects, nuisance wildlife. We have capabilities of sending things to the University of Florida if we can't determine what the problem may be or be able to identify a certain insect or plant disease. So we're here for you. Reach out to your own extension office in your county. You should be able to find it by just putting down IFAS extension or your county's name, and you'll find it there. And at that, I'll now take any kind of questions you may have.
Okay, hi, John. We do have a few questions. If there are questions, please put them in the Q&A and we'll address them now. So we'll start with the Q&A. There's also some in the chat as well, John. Our first question is, do you know of any mango that I can grow in, I believe that's Connecticut, Zone 7A? That wouldn't, CT 7A.
Okay, I didn't get the last part of that.
Is there any mango that can grow in Zone 7A?
7A would be the northern part of the state. What was the fruit again?
Mango.
Mangoes just will not do well there. I'm sorry. Unless you have a microclimate and the temperature does not drop below 38 degrees in the wintertime, which might be a little difficult. They don't particularly like the cold, and mangoes will not acclimate. So they are from Central Mexico and Central America. There's mangoes in India, Guatemala, throughout the world. It's the #1 fruit of the world. I don't believe I ever saw a very cold hardy mango. They just, once you get above Central Florida, I doubt seriously you're gonna grow any kind of mangoes in the northern part.
What about in a container? Someone mentioned perhaps Julie in a container might be suitable.
Well, you can grow things in a container. Like I said, if you have a greenhouse or you have some place where you can actually overwinter the thing without damage, that's possible. You'd have to get a mango that produces in the summer, okay? So if you bring a mango tree up north inside during the winter, it will not fruit if it's a winter fruiting mango. That's another thing we'll talk about in the third week. And the fact that certain varieties only fruit at certain times of the year. So mangoes, you can probably grow 3 different varieties of mango, which will provide you fruit from February to about December. So maybe the end of December and January, you wouldn't have fruit, but you know, at least one of those trees would provide fruit. But if you don't have the right variety and you try to grow it and it produces fruit in the wintertime, but you bring it indoors, it's not going to do anything. I would not try it unless you had a greenhouse to put it in, even in a container.
Okay, next question. How do I get my passion fruit vine to flower and fruit? Passion fruit.
Passion fruit will do well throughout most of the central area. There are different varieties. Usually it's a matter of pollination. So if you're not hand pollinating it, it'll flower. If you don't have any pollinators in the area, it'll still flower, but if it's not pollinated, it won't fruit. So you may want to attract some pollinators into your area that you're trying to grow your passion fruit. If your neighbor is spraying and killing all the various pollinators in the area, that's a problem as well. Some passion fruit also have problems with different types of soil pH. So if your fruit doesn't match the pH in which it will tolerate, then it won't fruit. It may survive, but it won't fruit.
Our next question, when should I start fertilizing my fruit trees and what is the best fertilizer?
Okay. Here's the answer. Tune in next week for full details, but each and every one of the publications from the University of Florida, if you go back, it's usually table 3. It gives you a month by month of what to do. It will tell you what fertilizer to use, how much to use, and when to apply it. Usually, as a rule of thumb, you're going to fertilize 3 times a year. And a general fertilizer usually does well. However, there are times in which you do not want to use fertilizer. A lot of the trees like mangoes and lychees during the fall, you don't want to use a high nitrogen fertilizer because it produces leaves, lots and lots of leaves, but you want fruit. So you want to reduce the amount of nitrogen and increase the amount of potassium. So you may want to switch different types of fruit trees. But again, the University of Florida publications makes life easy for you. It's kind of like Fruit Trees for Dummies. It tells you month to month what to do and how to do it and what to use.
Okay, are there any varieties of citrus that are less susceptible to greening?
No. In fact, the University of Florida basically has told homeowners that it's not wise for them to be planting citrus at this time because you will have problems with citrus greening. I myself have lost a lime tree to citrus greening. I knew it had the disease. Usually it's easy to detect. The tree, if you keep fertilizing it with a fertilizer that has micronutrients and you basically absorb it through the leaves. What happens to the disease is like arteriosclerosis for the roots, and the tree doesn't have the ability to bring in nutrients that it needs to grow. And usually after 2 or 3 years, the tree actually dies, okay? And it goes in every year, it gets a little bit worse and worse. The fruit gets smaller. It has somewhat of an off taste to it. You know, it starts losing leaves and branches. My tree blew over in a relatively small storm. It took me 10 minutes to get rid of the tree because there was no roots left to it. So it was that easy to dig up and remove. But I had like 300 limes that I had to give away to my neighbors.
Next question, is it possible to try to grow pomegranate in Atlanta?
Yes. There are certain species that do well up in that area. You'd have to know which ones. There is a lady in Zolfo Springs down here in our area that grows over 150 varieties of pomegranates. Okay. The University of Florida was looking at pomegranates. She got a grant to grow those to determine which ones would do well in the state. And they also wanted to find out where would be the best place to do pomegranate processing as far as making pomegranate juice and things like that. Right now, the only processing plant is in Georgia. It's in the southern part of the state. Atlanta, there's probably certain pomegranates that will do well there, but you'd have to do some research. I know they do get some snow from time to time. You'd have to be very careful. The southern part of the state, I'd say yes. Atlanta, it might be a little bit, you'd have to do a lot of research.
And to follow up on pomegranate, we have a question about a pomegranate tree that does not flower or give fruit. What does it need?
Okay, when it doesn't flower and doesn't fruit, okay, or it fruits and then the fruit drop and it rots or it looks bad, it's usually a fungal disease. And unfortunately, it's a fungal disease that's underneath the actual bark inside the cambium layer. So if you try to spray the tree with a fungicide, it basically does nothing whatsoever. So you actually have to provide a systemic fungicide into a drench and pour it around the base of the tree. And hopefully controls the fungus. But after a while, if you let it go too long, it will actually kill the tree. If in fact it's not a fungus, then it's more than likely a nutritional problem, and it may be the soil is not the best for pomegranate. The pH doesn't match, or it doesn't drain well. They don't like having wet feet either. So if it's very sandy and the water doesn't sit, and it basically percolates through the soil in less than 10 or 15 minutes, the tree's unable to pull any kind of nutrients out of it. So that could be a problem. Again, you need to make sure you're locating your trees where they will do the best.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a recommendation for a variety of blueberry for U-Pick operation in Volusia County?
Blueberries do well. You have to remember there's different types of blueberries. The southern high bush does well down here. You can't grow blueberries down in the southern part of the state. Up in the northern part, where you're talking about, they can grow the southern high bush and the northern blueberries. Most of the blueberries that do well in Florida have been developed by the University of Florida. So you're going to look for a hybrid. Normally they have names like Flora Blue, or I have a whole list of blueberries that does well. And unfortunately, I'm going to provide that 2 weeks from now on the third part of the series. So you can look at your extension office and they should be able to provide you which blueberries do well and also where the U-Pick areas are. So if you go to the U-Pick and you find out what variety they're growing, you should be able to grow that as well. I tell people, no matter what, try growing blueberries in containers. You need at least 2 different varieties for cross-pollination. So if you have only one blueberry plant in a container, it's just not going to do anything unless there's blueberries nearby. but they're easy to grow. They don't like having their roots disturbed. And I always recommend putting them in containers because most areas in Florida do not have the pH that blueberries really like. They like pH below 5.5. And most of ours is 6.8 to 7.2. So they never do well unless they're actually provided with a more acidic soil.
Okay, our next question is what fruit trees grow best in containers? What ones should I avoid keeping in containers?
Almost all of the fruit shrubs, things that never get more than 8, well, I shouldn't say 8 feet, but 4 or 5 feet tall, fruit trees that usually sit around 8 to 10, 12 feet. Those things you can grow without any problems whatsoever in a container. Now, a container might be a 25-gallon pot, but it's a lot easier, and it becomes a little bit more difficult to move around once it's in a container that size. All fruit trees in the state can be kept down between 10 and 12 feet in height. Okay, so container-wise, I would look around. I would see no problems growing a lot of things in there. You can try it. Next week, I'll be telling you how you grow things in containers. About every 2 years, you need to do what they call root pruning, okay? Because the roots will continue to grow. And if you don't prune the roots and at the same time prune the tree to maintain the small size, you're going to have problems. So it's a little bit more work, but it's one of those things where if you don't have any other space, it's just about the only thing you can do.
Okay, our next question is from someone in South Georgia, and they want to grow lemons from seeds. And when is the best time to start seeding?
What were they growing from seed?
Lemons.
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 Lemons as in lemons?
Yes.
Like everything else, you have to be very aware that if you try to grow things from seed, you may not get exactly the fruit that you were eating when you said, wow, those are really good. I would start the seed indoors. Okay, it may take a while to germinate, and allow them to pot up as they start to grow. And then put them out once the little tree is anywhere from 2 to 3 feet tall. But be aware, you may not get the exact same lemon. I mean, it's one of those things where citrus, like other things, basically will cross-pollinate. So you're not exactly sure what the parentage was. So you may get a lemon tree, and I have actually grown them that way. But normally you don't get what you thought you were going to get, and they're not that hard. I don't particularly think you should grow oranges or lemons or any kind of citrus from seed. It's just not predictable as to what the results will be, and it may take 8 to 12 years before you actually get any good fruit from the tree. And if it turns out something you don't particularly like or care, you've just wasted a lot of time and effort. It's always best to just go out and get yourself a very good tree from a reputable nursery and start with that. There's no guarantee. I would say out of 6 or 8 seeds that you put in, maybe 2 will actually come up.
Okay, John, we also have a few questions in the chat. Would you avoid trees from the big box stores?
All right. I can't say that you shouldn't. It's if the store itself is able to provide you with the scientific name. Okay, and we'll get to this next week as well, and the week after. It should have the genus and species, and then in parentheses, it should have a variety. If it just says mango or lemon or orange, you don't know what you're getting. And again, a lot of those trees come from down south, and it doesn't truly mean it's going to do well in your area. I can't say you shouldn't. I'm just saying you just need to be very skeptical. And again, they will basically try to grow seedlings or small trees and force it to fruit so that people go to the store and say, oh, look, we're going to have oranges or we're going to have peaches or whatever. So avoid doing that. And but if again, if they have a return policy, you're not happy with it, it dies real fast. Again, check the roots, see what happens.
Okay, here's a question. How close to a septic or drain field is it safe to plant a fruit tree, such as mango or papaya?
Okay, if you have some kind of a sanitation field, I would avoid growing things on top of the actual drain field itself. Usually you should have an idea of where that is. Most of the time, those areas are quite soggy to begin with, okay, because they're designed to percolate water up through those little holes in the pipes. I've grown fruit trees in orchards up north in which I had a drain field, but I did avoid the drain field altogether. It's not, I wasn't worried about so much the actual content of the water that seeps through there, but it's one of those things where you really don't want fruit tree roots to actually find their way into those little holes because that clogs up your drain field. Then you're going to have all sorts of problems with backed up drain fields. And you're probably going to wind up having to put in a new drain field, or that may be the, taking out your tree as well. Same thing with utilities. If you plant your tree over any kind of underground utility and they have to do work on that utility, your tree is going to go. And they'll have to replace a pipe or a wire or whatever. So yeah, I'd avoid doing that.
We do have some questions about fungal diseases, black fungus, and also some raised dark spots. I think you'll be addressing some of the disease and pest issues next week, right, John?
That's correct. Next week, I'll be looking at, okay, once we put the tree in the ground, how do we take care of it? So we're going to be doing more of the maintenance type things of that. And I really saved the best for last because people are always asking me, oh, what can I grow? What's really good? I'll answer those as well. There's so much to choose from. Florida is a great place to grow any kind of fruit trees. If you live up north in the state, or if you live way down in the south, even in the Keys, there's so many things we can grow down here. I've put together a collection of information over the years. I've identified over 300 different types of fruit that we can grow here in Central Florida that's not citrus and it's not nuts. So that's a large variety. Hard to believe, but there's only 75 Florida native fruits in the state. So most of the fruit trees come from somewhere else.
Okay, let's see. What about some advice on keeping birds and squirrels away from your fruits so that you get them and not them?
Yeah, that's next week as well. We're talking about critters and how to protect your fruit. Yeah, I'll be talking about that. Normally what you want to do is there's some sneaky ways of getting away of not sharing your fruit, but sometimes I tell people, look, it's unavoidable. the critters in nature will find a way to get to your fruit. Mangoes, I tell people, hey, look, there's a lot of mangoes out there. Basically wind up saving the ones you want. I take old screen, window screening, and I wrap it around the mango and staple it together. And raccoons, squirrels, and birds leave that alone. You can put netting over things to keep the birds out. I'll show you next week on how to protect your blueberries and things like that with screening and things like that. So there's ways to do that, but normally I tell folks, look, give some to the critters and protect the ones you want. Blueberries, any kind of berries. I've had problems in which, there's a lot of berries that go out there. So if you don't mind having a little peck out of your berry, that's fine. You can still eat it. I have a Barbados cherry tree that the birds love, and I'll still eat the cherries even though they've taken a little bite out of it. So you can't sell that in the store, but you can do that at home.
Well, thank you, John. We're just at about 12:30, and I think you've answered most of the questions, and I have put some links in the chat also that can help folks access some different resources from the university. And
if they want to contact me, they can send information through you, and I'll be happy to answer questions via email, or if they have a telephone, I can call them on that as well.
Yeah, please feel free to contact Manatee County Extension, and we will be happy to help you answer whatever questions you have. I want to thank you very much, John. Great presentation. You have lots of kudos in the chat. People really enjoyed it. And I want to thank everybody who attended. And please join us next week when John will be discussing care and maintenance of fruit trees. So that'll be February 17th at 11 o'clock. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Have a good day.